Think about this. In the 1960s, my grandparents had 5 kids, 2 houses, a car, a few boats for the cottage, vacations to Hawaii every few years, all on salaries of a security guard for the General Motors plant and a bowling alley attendant. Now think of a married couple you know who have blue-collar jobs like my grandparents and are able to afford 2 homes, a car, 5 kids, and vacations to Hawaii. If you're having a hard time thinking of this, you're not alone. It doesn't exist. In this episode, we're going to review the 4 worst politicians between Canada and the US by looking at economic events during their tenure and how they wrecked the future for all generations to come. If you think these conversations are interesting, please like and subscribe. My name is Chris, and this is the Think Report. There are countless reasons to find disdain in our politicians. But in this video, I am focused on the impact these politicians had on the financial health of everyday Americans and Canadians. I have 2 Canadian prime ministers and 2 US presidents that top the list on making the world worse for all of us. Before we start, we should review 2 economic concepts. Monetary policy and fiscal policy are both economic tools used to influence a country's economy, but they're implemented by different entities and have different objectives. Monetary policy is primarily managed by a central bank and focuses on controlling the money supply and interest rates to influence inflation and economic growth. Fiscal policy, on the other hand, is determined by the government and involves adjustments to government spending and taxation to achieve macroeconomic goals like managing unemployment and stimulating economic activity. This is the lever all these political leaders are adjusting during their tenure. Number 1 on our list is Pierre Trudeau. For all of our American viewers, Pierre is not to be confused with his son and the most recent former Prime Minister Juston Trudeau. During his leadership of the Liberal Party and Prime Ministership of Canada, Pierre Trudeau's government was characterized by substantial budget deficits. The 1970 budget marked the start of consecutive deficits, and by the end of his first tenure, the deficit had ballooned to $12 billion. In addition, purchase parity between the US and Canada began to diverge during his tenure. Purchasing power parity, or PPP, is a popular macroeconomic analysis metric used to compare economic productivity and standards of living between 2 countries. It compares different countries' currencies through a basket of goods approach. That is, that purchasing power parity is the exchange rate at which one nation's currency would be converted into another to purchase the same amount of large group products. In this chart, you can see that purchasing power parity peaked after Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister in 1968, followed by a downward trend until bottoming out in 1984 at the end of his tenure. As a result, for the last 4 decades, Canada-US purchasing power parity has hovered at around 85 cents. Why does this matter? It means that when Canada buys a car, it costs 15% more to do so, in spite of large portions of them being manufactured in Canada. Canada and US have almost identical economic influences, but thanks to Pierre Trudeau, Canada has done a much poorer job at managing them. Let's move to the US. Although this influences your grandparents more than your parents, someone has to take the fall for the Great Depression, and that particular shame belongs to Herbert Hoover. President Hoover occupies the bottom rung with a truly abysmal 77% cumulative stock market loss during his tenure, according to Kiplinger. In case you need a refresher, Hoover took office just months before the 1929 stock market crash that ushered in the worst bear market in US history. I don't think we can blame the whole crash on Hoover, although he played his part bringing about the whole mess. More than 1,000 economists signed a letter warning him not to sign his Tariff Act into law, yet he did it anyway. This helped to turn what might have been a garden variety recession into the Great Depression. In the end, Hoover may not have caused the Great Depression, but his decisions, especially signing his Tariff Act, turned a financial stumble into a full-blown economic collapse. It's a textbook example of how protectionist policies can backfire spectacularly. Fast forward to today, and we're watching history flirt with repetition. Donald Trump's reintroduction of sweeping tariffs, this time targeting China, Canada, and beyond, echoes the same economic nationalism that sank Hoover's presidency in the global economy. Tariffs may sound like a tough guy trade policy, but they often raise consumer prices, spark retaliation, and disrupt supply chains. Now, before we get into the next fiscal policy train wreck, let's talk about something that actually helps your financial future, Unrate.ca. If you're like most Canadians right now, you're getting squeezed. Inflation is up, housing is unaffordable, and getting a mortgage feels like solving a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. That's why I started Unrate. Unrate is Canada's smarter way to get a mortgage. We're not a bank, and that's a good thing. Instead, we work for you, not some suit behind a desk trying to upsell you on higher interest rates. We compare rates from dozens of lenders across Canada, including the banks, credit unions, and private lenders, and help you lock in the best deal based on your situation, not theirs. The best thing is that Unrate is free. Actually free. It costs you nothing to find the best rate. Unfortunately, we're only currently available in Canada. Sorry to my American viewers. So if you're a Canadian and you are a first-time buyer trying to break into the market, or renewing your mortgage and don't want to get fleeced by your current lender, or thinking about refinancing to free up some cash, Unrate makes it simple, fast, and 100% on your side. Honestly, if you're not at least comparing your mortgage options, you're probably leaving money on the table. Check out Unrate.ca and let's take your mortgage from confusing to crystal clear. According to a new Statistics Canada report, government regulation has grown over the years and it's hurting Canada's economy. The report, which uses a regulatory burden measure devised by KPMG and Transport Canada, shows government regulatory requirements increased 2.1% annually from 2006 to 2021, with the effect of reducing business sector GDP, employment, labor productivity, and investment. The negative results from Juston Trudeau are evident. Over the past 9 years, Canada's cumulative real growth GDP per capita, an indicator of incomes and living standards, has been a paltry 1.7% and trending downwards compared to 18% trending upwards in the US. Put differently, if the Canadian economy had tracked with the US economy over the past 9 years, average incomes in Canada would be much higher today. Also, in the past 9 years, business investment in Canada has fallen while increasing more than 30% in the US on a real per capita basis. Workers in Canada now receive barely half as much new capital per worker than in the US, and only about 2/3 as much new capital as workers in other developed countries. The Statistics Canada report, if nothing else, confirms what economists and the business community already knew. The regulatory burden is much of the problem. Of course, regulation is not the only factor hurting Canada's economy. Higher federal carbon taxes, higher payroll taxes, higher top marginal income tax rates are also weakening Canada's productivity, GDP, business development, and entrepreneurship. As a result, the economy is effectively in recession, even if, as a result of a rapid population growth fueled by record levels of immigration, the GDP statistics do not meet the technical definition of a recession. With abysmal GDP and business investment numbers, Justin Trudeau's incompetence has kneecapped Canada. For much of the post-World War II era, the United States saw a steady decline in the federal debt-to-GDP ratio, falling from over 100% in 1946 to around 30% in 1981. This decline was fueled by a combination of robust economic growth, moderate inflation, and relatively restrained fiscal policy, even amid the costly Cold War and Vietnam War periods. However, this long-term trend reversed sharply in the beginning of the presidency of Ronald Reagan during the 80s, whose economic platform, later dubbed Reaganomics, prioritized massive tax cuts, especially for high earners and corporations, significant increases in defense spending, and a belief in supply-side economics which assured tax cuts would pay for themselves through higher growth. You can probably already see the issue. Cutting government revenue at the same time as increasing government expenses isn't smart economic policy. It's quite risky. As a result of Reaganomics, when Reagan took office in 1981, federal debt held by the public was about 25% of GDP. And by the time he left office in 1989, it had nearly doubled to over 40% of GDP, despite strong economic growth during most parts of the 1980s. This marked a fundamental shift. Running structural deficits during peacetime was something that had been rare post-World War II. President Bill Clinton took office in 1993 and reversed some of this trend with a mix of tax increases, spending restraint in a booming economy, particularly from the tech boom. The result was that the U.S. briefly returned to budget surpluses in 1998 to 2001, the first surpluses since 1969, and as a result, the debt to GDP ratio fell from about 48% in 1993 to 32% in 2001. Clinton was the only modern president post-Reagan to leave office with a lower debt to GDP ratio than he inherited. Every president after Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, has seen rising debt to GDP ratios due to a combination of tax cuts, wars, financial crisis, pandemic spending, and structural deficits baked into the federal budget. By 2024, the U.S. federal debt held by the public stood at approximately 97% of GDP, and the total gross federal debt exceeded 120% of GDP, rivaling post-World War II highs. I'm picking on Reagan for starting this trend, but there's an obvious acceleration since 2000 that definitely needs to be reversed. I'm giving the honorable mention to Brian Mulroney, the Canadian Prime Minister from the mid-80s to 90s, who implemented the federal GST. The 7% GST was supposed to be a replacement for the federal manufacturer's sales tax, which was introduced in 1924. Set at a rate of 13.5%, the MST had been applied to manufactured goods at the wholesale level and was a hidden cost to the public that was generally unaware of. It does make sense to get rid of MST since it decentivizes the sale of Canadian manufactured goods. However, 13.5% on manufactured goods is not the same as 7% on all sales. The result was a new, permanent way for the government to dig into the coffers of every Canadian. Comparatively, the US still has no federal sales tax. Some states have it, but unlike Canada, there's no federal version, which means they aren't handicapping their economy at the till. So here we are, staring at the financial wreckage left behind by decades of policy failures, political hubris, and economic delusion. Your grandparents, with their modest jobs and modest dreams, could build a life that feels completely out of reach today for working class families. Thanks to our politicians, their structural decisions have chipped away at affordability, productivity, and opportunity. And the worst part, these weren't one-off mistakes. They were turning points that reset a baseline permanently. Structural deficits, hyper-regulation, inflation, housing costs, and eroding purchasing power are now features of our North American economies, not bugs. So next time someone says, well, times have always been tough, you can remind them, no, they actually weren't. Grandpa had it better. Because politicians broke the system and then told us to be grateful for the scraps. Next time a prime minister or presidential candidate tells you that he or she is going to save the environment, tax neighboring countries, or invade a Middle Eastern country, think critically and vote like your grandkids are watching. Think about that.